I'm pleased to be interviewing Murry Sidlin, the power behind, the energy behind, the person who had the seed and the germ of the idea to make the film Defiant, Requiem. Murry, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here. Very, very happy to be here at the Port Townsend Film Festival.
Tell us about your multiple roles in the film and kind of how the germ of the idea got started for you.
Well, I found the story. I didn't discover the story. That was a story that was told to all the survivors themselves and experienced it, but I came across it when I was living in Minneapolis and thought that this was a very powerful declaration of what beauty, wisdom, courage, and hope can mean to people who are in the concentration camps and experiencing the degradation of the Nazis. These people responded with the arts and humanities. They answered what is absolutely the worst of mankind with the best of mankind. And so when I came across this story, I was then motivated to, first of all, find out if it was true. What I was discovering was so shockingly unique. And because I have a Holocaust history in my family, not to know of any of this was also stunning. So then began the investigation.
Well, what personally stunned me, as somebody who, I was born in 1945, just at the end of the war, and the overriding arc of my childhood was the Holocaust, and seeing people's tattoos on their, numbers on their arms, and any discussion of it was always the horror. And of course the horror is still the horror, but this was so unimaginable to me. And it's not just about the music, because what you talked about yesterday that's very important for people to know was there was all kinds of learning going on there.
Yeah, at the terrorism concentration camp, and we have to cite that this is a terrorism uniqueness because it didn't really happen to the degree that it happened in terrorism. It didn't happen other places. And in most of the other camps, and there were quite a number of camps, it wasn't only 5 or 6, it was hundreds of them, this sort of activity of indulging in the arts and humanities, giving lectures, giving concerts, cabaret, opera scenes among themselves for each other seemed to be an extraordinary fortifying internal stronghold that was unique to terrorism. There were 2,400 lectures given over 3.5 years on every conceivable subject, close to 1,000 concerts. Concerts meaning cabaret, opera scenes, choral music, vocal music, chamber music, all sorts, and contemporary music, because there were 4 major composers in the camp who were to be the next generation of the great Czech composers, and they all went to the gas chamber. So the fact is that terrorism was such a hotbed of the arts and humanities that when we finally know everything that we should know about what took place in that era, it could be that terrorism will emerge as one of the truly most active arts and humanities communities in occupied Nazi Europe.
And what did it feel like for you to be in that setting? What was that like?
When I went there, you mean?
Yes, I imagine it was very complicated for you.
It was very complicated. It was, first of all, it was torturous. The first time I went to Terezin to investigate in the archives more about what I knew to be that this was a group of prisoners. Among them was a chorus of 150 volunteers who answered the call of a conductor who was a prisoner in the camp. He said he wants to produce performances of the Verdi Requiem. Now, that's a composition that is of extraordinary difficulty and of powerful musical declaration, but it's a very religious work, Catholic religious. And here are people who were to sing it who are imprisoned for being Jewish. And I'm thinking, what in the world is all this about? The complexity over complexity over complexity was, to peel away these layers and see what was at the core of it. somehow became my mission, because I just couldn't believe that people were going to sing the Verdi Requiem as a work to uplift, when in fact it was a place they were all in prison for being Jewish. So when I went there to sense what kind of place Terezin was, I remember so well. I went to one of the unmarked graves. There's a very large rectangular pit, all covered with stones, big stones, small stones. And you know, in the Jewish tradition, when you visit a cemetery, you are to leave a stone on top of the grave to indicate that you have been, that someone has been to pay respects, to pay homage to those who are deceased, who are lying there, who rest in that spot. But this was different. This was a rectangular grave. I can't describe how large it was, but it was quite large. And there are 1,500 unidentified people who died there. Now, Terezin, one has to understand, was not a death camp formally, meaning that there was no firing squad that was formally set up, but there was a firing squad. There was no gallows, but there was a gallows. And there was no gas chamber, except if the war had gone on for 3 or 4 more months, there would have been a gas chamber. So what was the killer at Terezin? Malnutrition and typhus. Now, when you design a place that is a prison and malnutrition takes place because people simply aren't getting what they need the body to be sustained, that's murder. When you don't provide medical attention to disease, that's murder. When you have the means and you don't do it.
Well, it's a setup. It's a setup.
Of course.
And these people, though, in spite of all of that, found the energy and got energy from what they were doing.
Right. So I went to this rectangular grave site of 1,500 bodies. And I remember I wanted to put down stones, just a few symbolic stones to indicate that another person had come to visit, to pay homage. And I remember just putting the stones down and touching the other stones. And I will tell you, as sure as I'm here, it was unsettled. It was unsettled. That there was emanating from that very, very religious place where humans were degraded and murdered for no reason other than some unspeakable, animalistic, barbaric people decided they shouldn't live. And so from that point of view, it was unsettled. And that was another motivating force. And I didn't know quite what I was going to do with all this. So my investigation took me to find several people who sang in that chorus, who are still alive, thank God, and still doing well, thank God. They're all in their 90s. And they became my teachers. When I went to them and I found them and I sat with them and asked them what happened, what took place, why did you sing, what was this all about, singing the Verdi Requiem in those circumstances? What did it do for you? What did it do for the people for whom you sang, your fellow prisoners, fellow inmates? And what was the reaction to people who were ultra-religious and not inclined to agree with the decision that someone made to do the Verdi Requiem in a Nazi concentration camp? So once I found these people and they became my teachers, then it became a rather incredibly important story. The backstory is my finding a book that told of this in 2.5 pages within a chapter about music at Terezin. But the front story is, what is the paradigm here? What is the lesson? What is the model? What is the beacon? What is the warning that all of these people were sending to us? It wasn't only the Verdi Requiem, it was the Verdi Requiem, which was an act of defiance and resistance.
And really an act of defiance and resistance which gave them a little bit of an uplifted spirit in the midst of horrible horrors. But you're a musician and a conductor. How has your relationship to the Requiem itself changed and to music in general changed since this experience?
How has my relationship to it changed? How about conservatively entirely? In every way imaginable. You can imagine.
Yeah.
You can imagine. It will never be the Verdi Requiem outside of the context of terrorism. It can't be for me, because it meant too much to these people. It's the same as when the survivors from that chorus now go to performances of the Verdi Requiem. I mean, within the first bar of the music, they're back. They're back at terrorism. They're back in those awful nights, those cold nights, those damp. I mean, after working slave labor hours of 10 to 12 hours a day, to go into the basement, to go into the cellar in the evening to rehearse, you know, and then come out and step over bodies that dropped in the street during the time they were in rehearsal, and then go out to work the next day, but they were fortified by the beauty and the power of the score, of the music that they were working on the night before.
And the connection to each other. I mean, music produces community in a way nothing else can. And I'm sure that the survivors that you've met have a connection to each other that is so unique.
Absolutely.
That there aren't words for it. What about the folks that weren't in the film that are still surviving? Tell us a little bit about a few of them.
Well, too bad you added the words that aren't surviving. If we had this interview last week, there was one that survived, that was still surviving. She turned 100 and she passed away just a week ago. I'm going to tell you about her anyway. She's not in the film except in spirit. Her name is Edith Steiner Krauss. And I met her 12 years ago in Jerusalem. I went to her home. She invited me in. And I asked her to tell me about her experiences at terrorism. She started by saying, my years in terrorism were some of the most wonderful years of my life. Wow. Dropped my jaw, you know, and I began, I don't know if your viewers know the word schwitz.
Well, I do.
Schwitz means you've got, where's the camera? You've got Niagara Falls running down your forehead.
I'm schwitzing here, Murry, the lights. Go ahead.
I was schwitzing when she said that there were some of the most wonderful years of her life. And then she qualified. She said, you know, before I went into terrorism, I was 19 or 20, she said, and I was building my career as a pianist, as a concert pianist. So what does that mean? It meant that I had to get engagements, I had to get good reviews, I had to make recordings, I had to get tours, I had to get conductors interested in me, all that stuff about the business of music. I go to terrorism, and there's a broken down piano. We tune it as best we can, and I play every day for 3 people, for 5 people, for 2 people, for 30 people, and I can see the difference. It's palpable, the difference in them as I play and after I play, what music can be. She said, I was reminded why I became a musician. So after the war's over, she, thank God, survived. She goes back, what does she got to do? Recordings, tours, got to rebuild the career. And to this day, she says her most productive, meaningful, useful, compelling time as a musician was in terrorism. And then I asked her, I said in a very naive way, Edith, tell me about the chorus that sang the Verdi Requiem. How good were they? And she gave me one of those looks. You know, one of those that I thought was like a weekend. It was probably only about 4 seconds. And she says, when you ask me a question like that, she says, you are interested in, did they sing rhythmically precise? How about the diction? What about the right notes, the choral color, the phrasing, all of these musical things? You're interested in all those musical things. And then she said, as if any of that mattered. She said, we were so deeply inside the music that we had returned to Verdi's desk.
Wow.
The origin, that we had penetrated the work to the origin. Now, I have to tell you, up until the time that she made that statement, I thought I knew something about music. I thought in my infinite wisdom and all my artistry and all my training and all my experience and all my powerful insight into music, I had a clear understanding what Brahms meant and what Beethoven meant and so forth. And she was telling me, in factual terms, I knew nothing.
And I bet you could really hear that. You could get that. Well, I'm going to shift a little bit because you've become also an oral historian. You've interviewed all of these people. You've really gotten really into the inner life of this story. What's left to be known? What's still unknown?
Plenty. We don't really know in specific terms how the people on the receiving end of the lectures, of the concerts, were really affected. We know that they were made better for the hour that they were involved. But on a longer term basis, what did it mean to them? I mean, these were still people who were starving, they were still sick. And we need to know more about the tremendous power of learning, of the arts, of humanities, and what concentration on the goodness of creativity can really mean to people.
And how do they really turn the corner and even let themselves be drawn into viewing the world in that kind of way?
That's a very important issue because it became very easy when you came to the camp just to give up.
And many did.
And many did. In fact, one of the survivors, Vera Schiff, who's in the film, she lives in Toronto, she said to me, you could always tell someone who was not long for this world when the next day they came into the company of others and there was a button missing from the shirt which had not been replaced. That was the first sign that there was no hope, no need.
They weren't taking care of themselves anymore.
They had lost their self-dignity.
Yeah.
And so the lessons, psychological, social, aesthetic, are still in the myriad stage. There are still people's work that we haven't uncovered, really. I mean, lectures, paintings. We have a lot of the paintings, we don't have them all. And
how do you keep searching?
you know, it's just one step at a time. You pick up a piece of information and you follow it through. You follow it through. And the people who are still living, they're mostly all in their 90s now. With gentle perseverance, we have to keep tapping. We have to keep, tapping. Every now and then, I get a phone call from Marianka May, who's in the film, who said to me not too long ago, just about 4 months ago, Murry, I remembered the name of the dentist who was the piano teacher.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Very special.
Yeah, exactly.
Very special. And it seems to me that phrase, gentle perseverance, says it all, because in talking to Holocaust survivors myself, it is so complicated, but if you move into the connection, if you move into it carefully, if you really show the interest and the caring, because this generation doesn't really know much about what happened. You're keeping history alive in such a palpable way, but in order to get it, these people need to be honored at the same time as they're interviewed.
Absolutely. And I asked these two Holocaust scholars who I got to know, who live in Portland, when I was there at the Oregon Symphony for 8 years, and I asked them about techniques of interviewing, and you'll think this is great. They said, oh, well, we specialize in the Colombo method. And I thought, well, there must be some PhD thesis by, Giacomo
exactly.
Colombo. And they said, no, the guy on television with the raincoat, he starts to walk out of the room and he says, so I'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Sir, just one more thing.
Yeah, and you look a little schlumpy and and not overbearing, and it works.
But that's what you do. That's called just taking the little ball peen hammer and going tap like that and leaving it.
Yeah.
But then coming back in another week or two. That's the Colombo method. Gently tapping into it, because it's 70 years of memory.
Yeah, but that's also the perseverance, because you come back each week, and in the interim time, you've gotten stuff going in people's minds, and then they have the new information for you.
And
or they've reached the old information, I mean.
And if we are going to be the messengers, and if we are going to give them their voice, then we have to keep at it.
Thank you, Murry Sidlin. It's been Sidlin. I'm sorry. Thank you, Murry Sidlin. It's been a genuine honor to meet you in person.
Pleasure is being here. This is one of the greatest film festivals ever because of the people who run it and their intensity and love for what they do, what they're doing.
Back at you, kid.
Yeah.